Good afternoon. It is April 17, and we are here for our board workshop on the strategic plan. So I'll let Bill take it off.
Well, thank you. I just want to welcome members of our learning and teaching team. This is really their work. They have done a wonderful job of pushing the strategic plan forward, and this is going to be their show today, and they'll give you some updates on where we're at with some things and share some data and engage you with some of the information. So, Mike.
All righty. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Liz, do you want to turn our slideshow on? All righty. So we have a ton of information for you today. So I'm actually going to save a little bit of time and not read you the agenda. We're just going to jump right on in here to our essential question, along with our rational and experiential outcomes. Our essential question for today is kind of always our essential question, which is, are our students learning and how do we know that? What we're doing today models processes that the building leadership teams do, that the learning and teaching team does, in an ongoing attempt to monitor whether or not our actions, our structures, our systems and practices are influencing student learning the way that we expect them to do. So we're going to invite you to kind of roll up your sleeves and get a little bit dirty with the data with us today. And so we're looking forward to that. The rational outcome for our time today is for us to build that shared knowledge of our current student performance data. And then more on the experiential side, learning about how our systems, structures, and practices that support student learning have evolved over time. What is going on? Sorry, folks. All righty, just a brief little opening activity for you today. When you look at data, sometimes it can feel very impersonal and it becomes about numbers as opposed to about our big people and our little people on their journey to try and impact student learning in a positive way. So what I'm going to ask you to do is spend about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, just kind of reflecting on the image. And the image has Legos essentially representing data or numbers, and they have a variety of different ways of organizing it. You have just data all kind of thrown in a pile, you have it sorted, then you have it arranged, then you have it presented visually, and then you have it explained with a story, and that's the one where you have the house at the end there. So individually reflect on that for just a few seconds, and then with an elbow partner, respond to the image as it relates to our student performance data. What? No, we have to have a door open. Okay, and I'll invite you to wrap up your comments. Thank you. Thank you for that. One of the questions that I get asked somewhat on a regular basis when we spend time with our board directors is, how is this different than what we've done in the past? And PLCs is one of those questions. People will say, well, we've been doing PLCs for a long time. What is different about what we're doing now compared to what we were doing back then? And we want to spend, that's going to be an ongoing theme for our time together this afternoon, is really looking about how things were and how things are now. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples of how things are different now as we approach guaranteed and viable curriculum and PLCs in a more systemic district-wide format. Previously, individual students' educational experience varied greatly based on, for lack of a better term, the luck of the draw. It depended on what school your address sent you to. It depended on what teacher you had as an instructor, because there was so much that was left to individual discretion that we didn't have a way to guarantee that we knew exactly what each one of our students were getting, and that was going to be consistent across our buildings, which is the difference that we have now. We have a guaranteed and viable curriculum that ensures equitable educational experience for our students. Here's another example. Previously, we would frequently talk about the intentions of our work. If we're leaders, we talk about, well, this is what we think we need to do, and this is what we would like to do. We intend to do this work. The shift that has really happened very strikingly over the last year is leaders not so much talking about their expectations, talking about the evidence of their work. And I want to show you an example that is essentially a year apart, and it kind of illustrates this difference in intentions versus evidence. So one of the things that we will frequently do when we do our leadership meetings, and leadership meetings involve all of our principals and directors, is we'll do some sort of an activity at the end where we're asking them to kind of document what their next steps would be. Based on what we learned today, what is your next step as a building leader? This is a next step that was shared in March 22, so about a year ago. There was an elementary principal whose next step was, well, iReady data results could be used with teams to review and finish the year strong. And now I want to show you a very similar response to a meeting that occurred almost exactly a year later from the same principal. And same type of idea. We brought leaders together to do an experience, to learn something, to learn from one another, and then ask them to point out what is your next steps once you get back to the building. And this is the same principal who a year later said, continuing to refine our walk to reading intervention based on grade level data meetings every 6 weeks, most current data review, planning outcome examples. And then he's actually putting his data examples in there, which really kind of illustrates the difference between talking about what we intend to do and the evidence of what we are doing. Corey's going to talk about another aspect of kind of this then and now.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And so this is the question that I posed. Why would it be important for our educators to implement a model of data review at the unit level as opposed to the end of a grading period? Just something to think about. It's more of a rhetorical question, not one that I'm looking for an answer, but this question is what describes the latest change to the TPEP model and our evaluation process, and also helps support the work that we're doing in the PLC at work. Oopsie. Okay, now that I'm on track here. So this is the then and now. Teachers' goals then were measured by lagging indicators that didn't allow for reteaching. Now, teachers' goals are measured by leading indicators that inform instruction and help understand what students know right now. And so there's been an age-old controversy with lagging versus leading indicators. And this shift is a great example of how we're actually having teachers focus on the work that's in front of their students right now that actually tells them, what do the students know now, and how can we intervene, and how can we support, and how can we reteach, as opposed to looking at lagging indicators, which are more of those, the tests that are more final, the summative assessments that we take maybe at the end of a trimester, at the end of a semester, at the end of the grading year, as a summative assessment, or even a smarter balance assessment. So the process that we're looking at and we're excited about is we're making that shift with our teachers as well in the work that we're doing in the PLC process. And the state is also pushing in that direction as well with the TPEP process. And so this slide indicates that student growth goals have been a part of the evaluation process ever since we moved to the TPEP model. And the units of study that I just kind of described also complements the PLC at work that we're doing in our PLCs right now. These are the 3 different student growth criterion that we have with our educators as we move them through the TPEP model. Criterion 3 recognizes individual learning needs, which has that subgroup piece. So maybe you're focusing on students that are lacking in their attendance, or students that might have IEPs, or our ML students, our multilingual students as well. Criterion 6 is using multiple data elements to modify instruction. So this is going to have summative and formative assessments there, and pre and post data. And then criterion 8 is collaborative practices to improve student learning. And this is where your PLC groups come up with a collaborative goal that everyone's going to work on and focus on for that entire year. If you are a more veteran teacher and you're on what we call the focus evaluation, or short form is what we used to call it, you would do one of these goals every year. And if you are on a comprehensive evaluation cycle, more of our newer teachers, or every 6 years for our experienced and veteran teachers, you would have 2 of these goals each year. And these are tracked with the building administrator and the evaluator. And usually we'll link also to the school improvement plan and also to the strategic plan as well. And then this is a quick example of what the rubric looks like. So for each goal, whether it's criterion 6, 3, 6, or 8, there are 2 scoring rubrics that go with it. The first scoring rubric, which you can't really see, but it says student growth 3.1, right about where it says we're sharing our screen on Zoom as well. But that lets us know that the 3.1 indicates we're actually scoring the goal itself. And so there's a great deal of collaboration between the building administrator and the teacher on the creation of that goal, and making sure that it fits all the elements of the proficient area, because we're able to do that collaboratively. So the building administrator knows this is exactly what we're going for here in the proficient goal, and we're going to make sure that you have a goal that comes out proficient in the very end. The next rubric that we look at is the outcome. Okay, so yeah, student growth 3.2 is the achievement of the student growth goal. And so this is where the data comes in. And you can see there on the proficient line that is the goal that we're looking forward to. So 2 areas to score when we create these student growth goals: the goal itself, and then the data and the outcomes with that. Yes, Mr. Eagle.
I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to say that what you just saw is the direction the state is heading, these rubrics. And what you're seeing here is that this team has advanced work in the PLC arena that is going to fit directly with the direction the state is moving with teacher evaluations. This is going to line up greatly with the work that these folks have done with the PLC groups. So commendable. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Work. And we appreciate where our leaders are with this work as well, because next year is actually a pilot year for OSPI, and districts can opt into this version of the student growth goal process. And as the learning and teaching team has collaborated this year with our building leaders, our whole district will move forward in adopting these as the goals that we're going to use for the 23-24 school year, even though it's not quite yet what we have to do. So that's a great example of our leaders taking on the next step. So the next piece, we have Amber Burks, we have Heidi Busk, we have Jeremy Wheatley, and we have Sarah Wall here from our learning and teaching team, and they are going to guide us through the data review as our engagement activity for the remainder of the time today. And we have 4 phases of data review, and I'll turn it over to Sarah to get us started.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as you know, there are many different purposes for analyzing data and a lot of different data sets that could be used. So for today, we have some specific goals that we want to focus on, and those include building awareness and understanding each other's viewpoints, beliefs, and assumptions about the data, and also understanding and making shared meaning of the data. We know that, of course, collaborative conversations and planning based on the data is really important. But first, before we can get there, we have to be able to have and understand what the data is telling us. So for our data protocol today, we'll be going through these 4 phases of prediction, data diving, observations, and inferences. And we'll be walking you through each of those. So in front of you, you have a data dialogue packet. And what we'd like you to do is take a little bit of private think time, about 3 minutes or so, to record some predictions and assumptions and some wonderings that perhaps you already have about Wenatchee School District data. You've all had the opportunities to see our data before, through different lenses. And so we're going to dive into this piece of really activating your prior knowledge and your thoughts about the data. And then once you get done just jotting down a few ideas, we'll have a few minutes just to go around and share one statement. So you can think about which one you'd like to share. Okay, now we'd like to give each of you an opportunity to share one of your thoughts that you wrote on your paper, whether that's an assumption, a prediction, a wondering, or perhaps a question or a possibility.
I assume that the presentation is going to provide the board with some valuable insights as to the status of the student achievement at the district.
I predict our student data has improved. However, what is our demographical data looks? Oh, sorry. Can't read my own writing. I predict our student data has improved, but our demographical data continues low.
I wonder, I'm sorry. There we are. On the one-to-one, how to take
assumptions, predictions, and then move to inspection and extrapolation, focusing on the next step rather than looking back.
My questions and expectations are influenced by my knowledge of teaching and educating, or lack thereof.
Julie?
Julie?
Sorry, struggling to get it off mute. Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, okay. So I assume as we become more proficient in data gathering and analysis, we will be able to use data to make adjustments to student learning in real time.
Okay, thank you all for sharing. So let's see, we want to just give you a quick explanation of the data before you have a significant chunk of time to dive into it. You'll have a data packet. You already have that, and it includes some iReady reading data, iReady math, Lexia Core 5, Power Up, and Common Formative Assessment data. So we want to just walk you through. We're not going to actually present and make sense of the data. We're just going to make sure that you have a good sense of what you're looking at before you dive in deeper. Okay, so here, this is going to be similar to iReady data that you've seen before. And this just shows you some key data that informs our instructional practice. So with these data sets, you'll be looking at proficiency and growth data trends. So you can see the green representing students on grade level, the yellow representing students approaching grade level, and the red signifies students who are below grade level. On these particular graphs, you can see winter on the left-hand side and fall on the right-hand side. And then in the center, you can see the percentages that have grown over time. We use the iReady assessment as our universal screener given to all students K-8, 3 times per year. And then we've included some data for subgroups. This is our Hispanic and non from fall to winter for reading. You also have English language learners, a comparison there versus non-English language learners and how each of those groups did from fall to winter. And then you have some longitudinal data. And this is important because it shows you what's been happening over several years of time. And so you can think about things that have occurred. For example, we had our COVID and our lockdown, and that's represented here. And you can see the percentage of proficient students and their growth each year for the past several years from fall to winter to spring. Of course, we don't have our spring data for this year, so that test hasn't been given yet. And then you'll be able to see the same information for iReady for math, Hispanic and non, ELL and non, and then longitudinal for math as well. And I'm going to pass it over to Heidi Buss to share about Lexia Core 5.
Yes, so Lexia Core 5 is our computer adaptive blended learning program that accelerates literacy skill development for our K-5 students. The first slide you see here shows students working at each different level. On the left is their starting levels, and then on the right is where they are right now, working in different levels in April. This way? Yeah. All right, so the next slide is also from Lexia Core 5, and our students who are behind grade level or below grade level in Lexia Core 5 and working below grade level, we want them to grow more than 1 year. So, or it's hard to catch up. So this shows students working 1 grade level below, 2 grade levels, 3 and 4, and how many Lexia levels they have completed. So to complete a year's worth of growth in Lexia, it's between 3 and 4 or between 3 to 4 levels, 3 in the primary grades, and then second grade is that transition year where they need to complete 4 levels to grow by 1 year. So this shows how much they have grown in a year, depending on where they started. And then I'm going to turn it over to Amber for the secondary piece. Whoops, or just pop the microphone off and I can hold it.
Okay, nice. Okay, yeah, now we're looking at, I'm going to advance one here. Yeah. So really similar to what Heidi just explained, this is Lexia Power Up for our middle school students. So 6th, 7th, and 8th. And you see it organized here in 3 big chunks. You'll see word study on the far left, grammar in the middle, and then to the far right here, you see comprehension. Those are the 3 major areas that our students are constantly assessed on anytime they log in. They're interacting in one of these 3 components of language and reading. And you can see it's the start of the year and then current. And this data was pulled this month in April. Next, we have Lexia Power Up again, and this one is more about, looking at our 3 middle schools. It's about the average, it's the weekly usage, and then the usage, and again, word study, grammar, and comprehension, because how we structure usage is directly will impact the learning. The more students are in that, each one of the zones. So that's why we take a look at usage and pay attention to it.
And then we wanted to talk a little bit about then and now. Let me get to my next slide here. And how we used to use our assessments then and how we use our assessments now. So you don't have, I don't think, do you have this one in their slides? You don't have this one in your packet. But we'll talk as an example, we'll use math assessments. So we used to know the math standards, but we all had different interpretations about proficiency across a school, across the district, across a grade level. We used broader data to respond to student need. So for example, a student might earn 50% on a math test. So they might need to retake that test. Or we look at iReady, beginning mid-year data and make a determination about what students need based on that. But now in math and ELA and many other content areas, we've unwrapped priority standards and have clarity on what proficiency looks like system-wide. So in grade 4 across the district, everyone knows what a standard about multi-digit multiplication means and what it means to be proficient in that standard across the district. We use common formative assessments, CFAs, that we've designed with teachers around priority standards, and they're designed to measure what students know and need to learn for specific priority standards. So an example of that, rather than 50% on an assessment, a teacher might say, student A can multiply using the area model for multiplication, but needs to learn how to use base 10 understanding and partial products. That's their next step. That's what they still don't know yet. So it's very targeted and specific. So the data that you're going to see is just an example. Oh, mine disappeared. Look at that. Is it there on, let me see if it's on this one. It's not on tonight. Oh, it's still on there. All right, so what you see on this slide is an example that I think you've seen before, as Bill has shared with you. This is how we look at, teachers will sit down together and they will look at student by student, standard by standard, skill by skill. What do they already know? What do they need to learn next? It is very targeted, and this is the work of teachers unit by unit. So it really, you can see how that really ties in with what Corey was talking about. So you just see a little snippet of that to give you a sense of what that looks like.
Thanks. Okay, and to continue what Heidi was talking about, when teachers come together and now they're collaborating in their professional learning time, they can look by student, by standard, to have a data protocol that helps them take a look at how many students, and this is by teacher, so you can see it's teacher A, B, C, D, and they take a look and say, they've set a SMART goal, which Corey was also talking about. They want a certain percentage of students to meet or exceed the standard and another percentage of students to be approaching the standard. So then they collectively answer the question, you know, how are we doing? Did we get our students there? And what are we going to do if we didn't? For those students who still need intervention, and what will we do if we did for those students who need extension? And so that's an exciting movement.
So you'll see that again for grade 4, the example that I talked about. So as teachers sit down and look student by student to determine what interventions they need, then they also can use this data to see, how are we doing? Teacher B, what did you do? Because so many of your students met standard. So they can have conversations around this data that also inform their instructional practices. So this is an important piece of their collaboration and the snippets of data that they look at unit by unit.
And then we are building systems to look school by school. So similar process, but now at our instructional leadership meetings, our instructional leaders are looking at the data and we're having those same conversations. What can we learn? What are the bright spots? Where could we replicate where we're getting a lot of growth? What instructional strategies are having the greatest impact? What professional learning might we need to be offering? So that's now looking at the school data.
Okay. And this is an example of looking at school data for elementary school. And one of the other things that really comes out when we start to look at school data is all of our bars don't line up yet. And so when all of our proficient bars are about at the same spot, we know that we have guaranteed and viable. Our systems are working. Right now, we're kind of a little bit off on some of them. So that is a nice indicator for us as a district level to be able to say, oh, we are getting closer to really having that guaranteed and viable across our system.
Okay, so if you can take your data dialogue packet now and move to page 2 under phase 2, data diving. We want to give you a nice chunk of time at this point to analyze the data with a partner. You can choose a small subset of the data if you're really interested in something specific, or you can look at as much of it as you want. There's probably more there than you can really dive deeply into, but we wanted to provide you with plenty to choose from that might interest you. So we're going to give you some time and allow you to take some notes, mark up the data however you want. And then this is just a sheet where you can take any pertinent notes that you want to refer back to. So we'll have about 20 minutes for this segment. And are we partnering up with them?
Sure, yes.
We'll come alongside and partner up with you as well.
Can I break protocol on this for a second? Because I think for me, it would make a difference in reading the data. Where you have something like this in 3 parts, it would be really helpful to look at the cumulative at the end of the green. You kind of see that in the bar one, just like that. You can see where the greens end and you're looking at cumulative. But in this one, often the middle one is moved when you're comparing beginning and end, winter and fall, and maybe put in parentheses, but you'd be looking at the cumulative, you'd get a much stronger and quicker read on the middle one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. These graphs just come straight from iReady, but I understand what you're saying. It would be nice to build those. Yes.
And I just wanted to add to Julie, who's joining us remotely, that I did share this slide deck with her in her Wenatchee School District email, so she'll be able to digest the data that way.
And I did get it.
Just a quick question. Is there a reason why the schools were not identified in the last page? Uh-huh.
Still in the process of coming together on CFA administration agreements and at the elementary level. And so we just wanted it to be a sample of what it looked like, but we can definitely, as we move forward, share that information.
Absolutely. Yeah, same, I mean, all grade levels, I think same thing for the middle schools.
Yeah.
I get the teacher part, but the school, I think we need to highlight what's working or, what schools are
Yeah.
struggling and what are doing well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. And we're just in the process and still building that whole system of how to bring out that information and to be able to share that. So our first official look at it with the leadership or the administrative team was recently, and we just got to go through that process. So in the future that we can move forward with that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so if we're ready to dive in, we'll just go ahead and start the timer up here so you have a sense of how we're doing with time, and we'll plan to be done with this piece by 20 minutes, maybe a little earlier if needed. So.
I'm good.
Okay, so hopefully you got a nice chunk of time to dive in deeply to some of the data that you were curious about and maybe even got further and looked at more data than you expected to. During this next phase called observations, we want to give you a couple of minutes of private think time to really consolidate your thinking. That's a brain-based strategy. Consolidate your thinking. And then on page 3 of your data packet, to just record some of your observations, patterns, or trends that you noticed. And so on this particular phase, what you really want to do is think about factual things that you noticed in the data, or a pattern or trend that you noticed. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to share out. So you can think about one statement that you'd like to share out. Okay, I want to give Julie maybe an opportunity to share out her statement. Julie, are you still with us? Okay, maybe we lost her. All right, so let's just go ahead and give you each of you an opportunity to share one of your statements that you observed, or a pattern or trend that you noticed, or maybe you came across something that was surprising that you'd like to share.
That's something that I found, or that we found when we were looking at the longitudinal data. For me, I feel like I see greater strides typically in language skills or reading skills before we see increases in math ability. But when you're looking at the longitudinal data, the growth from fall to winter, the percentages are almost exactly the same. And so, right or wrong, that kind of indicates to me that maybe we're still in a ramping up phase of where we're seeing an increase in ability, or because we're seeing an attendance again, and we're seeing engagement again, but there's still a lot of ramping up to do, because I would have expected that I see a bigger difference in the growth in reading in English, or reading in language, than seeing a growth in math, because math is usually harder for everybody. So that was one of the things that patterns that I noticed. And should I just go ahead and do my second one? Is that I'm surprised to see that there's a distinct decrease in the growth when you're comparing middle school versus elementary school. So we're seeing a little bit of growth in elementary school, or quite a bit, but it's almost like kids are stalling out when they get to middle school in the growth areas.
Thank you. Someone else?
I'll go with one that actually came indirectly out of the data, is seeing how the system creates the ability to target, I wrote in my words, differentiated skills or categories, which then links you to the cause of the performance, not just the performance. So that's on the positive side. And then on the negative side, looking at the closing the gap one, I think that's attention grabbing, because only about 8% are doing more than 1 year's progress in 1 year. So only 8% are getting further ahead. About 30% are holding their own, treading water, and the rest are in varying ways going further back. So then that leads to early intervention, and also leads to the national characteristic we have of extreme differences across the spectrum of good fortune and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So we're dealing with greater inequality on a dynamic pattern mathematically on that exhibit.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to see this data also broken down into more subcategories. I think we need to see our special education numbers as well as our low socioeconomics demographic. But what I've noticed is, bouncing off the gap that Martin just mentioned, I specifically I read reading and math data. There's growth all across for English language learners, non-English, Latinos, non-Latinos. However, so there's growth across, those three demographics. However, there's greater growth for our non-Latino, non-Spanish, English language learners. So even though there's growth, the gap is still widening.
Mm-hmm. Staying the same or widening.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
I hesitate to speak, but I will, my initial impression of this data is, while there are pockets of, interesting information herein, I'm not really finding that this, like Maria said, data broken down into more categories. I'm noticing that I didn't see the high school kids anywhere in here. I'm not getting a really great picture of the entire district and how we're doing from the data as it is presented. There's some typographical things perhaps with the way it's presented and grade levels not being identified and so on. I do find that the example of the classroom daily data collected, I don't know what else to call it, but this little chart here. And I appreciate from Mike's comments that we are implementing a system. We're making systemic change in the way that we are approaching delivery of curriculum. And I do appreciate that because I think it will help ensure that more students or less students fall through the cracks as the years go by. What I've noticed over time is that our district has pretty much held steady with our achievement data. We've not made any big improvements in learning over a long time. We've made some improvements in some areas. We've improved graduation rates, for example. We've leveled out the graduation rates between the ethnicities, and so we have made some incremental changes, but I appreciate this classroom-based data collection and attention, and hopefully the PLC questions being directed at each individual student. I think that is what it will take. I'm worried about the kids that are falling through the cracks, and I want to know, this is a rhetorical question, but something to reflect on is, what is it going to take for us to be a district where 98% of the students are meeting grade level standards? What is the breakthrough thinking that we need to have as a district and a team to make that happen? That's what I was hoping to see evidence of today, and we didn't see that. So I'm a little grumpy about that. Mike can attest to it. But those are my comments. I want all, and it's not for the lack of any of you caring about kids and caring about your work. I get that, because I've seen it many times, really super caring, qualified people coming and putting their heads to the question, and still we can't really bust through the barrier. Let's bust through the barrier, guys.
Well, thank you. And that's what these, that's the kind of thinking that needs to come from all of these types of data discussions. We need to be able to have candid, thoughtful conversation about what we're seeing, what it means, and then move forward into planning, right? So I appreciate that.
Because Laura spoke, I'd like to give a different perspective. I wrote down that data provides cues for action. They're small f facts. If people get fixated on a particular number or a particular result and live in a static world, then they're not looking at what's the cause, what are the measurements. All measurements are imprecise. Our populations change. I think that if I agree it would be nice to get great results, but that's not the point. The point is what enables you to get great results. And it's also a multi-year effort. And it's easy for me, I'm looking at this as if it's year one. But I do think because I think it's an important thing to express for everybody as a different aspect, not this is what the result was. That's called quality control. Toyota got rid of that in industry a long time ago, got into in-process management of everything. And I'm not going to take that on trust, because this is one little picture. The next picture's got to build on it, and it's got to build on it. You don't trust it until you've seen it repetitively. So I'm not going to say it's there. But I do think that it's important to give respect to the dynamics of the system and not just focus on the specific results. That both parts are important.
Thank you. Okay, so for our last phase of our data protocol today, we're going to be engaging in some more reflection. And on page 4 of your packet, you have an opportunity to share to write down a brief statement of what you believe the data suggests. And we're happy to partner with you for this. And then Maria, for example, you shared some additional data that would be helpful. And so this is a place to think about that, what other data could be helpful for confirming or verifying or diving deeper or next steps in planning. So we'll take just a few minutes to do this piece. So you've all done a great job of already sharing perhaps some of what you believe the data suggests or additional data that would be helpful, but I want to just make sure to give you an opportunity if there's something else related to these 2 or 3 pieces that you'd like to talk about.
I would agree with Maria that it would be nice to have greater segregation of the populations and classifications. I think, that would, and I know that to some extent we're dependent on the software we've got, but I do think that's the left hand, the right hand being the different categories that we can target. So I think that level of precision would be nice. And as far as the data is concerned, it shows that more work is needed. But the next part comes, use the tools and give people support.
Thank you. Anyone else?
How do we know yet how this type of data translates to SBA scores, if it's still called the SBA? We have growth here, but really when people look and do research on our district, they're looking at OSPI's report card, right? And they're really focusing on those state assessments. I know last year was the first year we had a full assessment after COVID. Well, we had one in the fall and then one in the spring.
Yeah.
Can we expect SBA scores to reflect growth like we are seeing here?
The iReady particularly is highly correlative with the Smarter Balance. The correlation is around 90%. So we know from looking at our iReady data, and that's one of the reasons we give the winter iReady, is to give us a very clear picture of where our students are right then. And then we can drill down deeper and try to help them make growth before the spring. So there is a very high correlation. Now, the common formative assessments and the Lexia and Power Up, of course, we're focused there on using that data and those instructional programs to drill down into specific skills that students need that we know are aligned to the standards. And so that's more standards focused versus predictive of smarter balance, but it's all working together and tying together to see a full picture of what our students are able to do and then supporting them in making progress. Okay, well, if there's nothing else for the data review, I will pass it back to Mike Lane.
Yeah, I don't, but we can give them a sneak peek, just on this.
Jeremy and Heidi have talked a little bit about our ML programming. We don't have time to get deep. We want to do this, so we'll go get them during the we'll get a snapshot. And I look forward to them coming together. We put in that activity. So.
All right, thank you. So I've been listening a lot and unfortunately, we won't have time to dive into this next section, but I feel like that this is where many of the answers lie. Because it's a terribly complex, student improvement is a terribly complex topic. But I think if we take a step back and focus on the fundamentals, like Martin was alluding to, what enables us to get results? Well, it's improving on the little things, and then we let the results take care of themselves, right? So, but in order to do that, a large subgroup that everybody's been sort of talking around and looking at and walking around for many years are our multilingual learners. And so we were going to share just sort of where we're at. We had a CPR this year, and with Nadia Bush going to the ESD, I took on migrant and bilingual with the help of Heidi and have learned a lot. And so that's why I believe that's where many of our answers lie. And so I wanted to just sort of set the foundation for that. So unfortunately, we're not going to have a lot of time. It's really around we have 3 program models, two-way dual language. So Lewis and Clark. When we think of TBIP, there's really 3 main buckets, and that's the dual language program at Lewis and Clark, which is very specific. It has its own specific outcomes to be bilingual, biliterate, and bicultural. And it's a 2-way model, meaning in general, those students should be getting half of their day in Spanish and half of their day in English. So it's a very unique, very specific program. The other program we have is Early Exit. It is at Lincoln, Mission View, and Newberry. And so the primary outcome for that, it's a K2 model. And it's to transition newcomer or beginning English speaker, native Spanish speakers into English by the end of 2nd grade. Because when they step into 3rd grade, there will not be teachers that are able to communicate them in their native language. And so there again, very specific outcome associated with Early Exit, where the bulk of the work really resides is in supportive mainstream. This is where every other student is, and where we need to start. There's been, I think, kind of we need to start with the classroom teacher. We have a lot of intervention, and we're supporting from kind of underneath, and we have to get in front of it. And so right now we have almost 1,700 bilingual students, bilingual qualified. And so hopefully in another workshop or a session, I can share more about the program and some of the plans we have for next year. I'm very optimistic about where We're going to take our bilingual program specific to supportive mainstream and moving those bilingual qualified students to catch up with their peers in terms of academic achievement. Okay. So again, we can get into that, but that's really where I feel like a lot of the work needs to be. But for now, we would just like to close. Well, I feel that reflection is an important part of the learning process, and with so much kind of heavy data and complicated problem solving, I'm going to give everyone an index card, and I just want you to capture what you've maybe learned from today that might inform, if we were to fast forward 1 year from now, what would look differently from your perspective? What would you want to look differently? So we did a lot of that was then, this is now, that was then, this is now. Well, what about tomorrow? What about a year from now? We heard about intentions versus evidence. You looked at student data. We didn't get to the ML program. However, either way, what's rolling around in your head that you want to capture that's meaningful questions or learnings that you want to take potentially into next week, into next year, share with our current or next superintendent to guide our work next year. I think a few minutes of reflection and capture some salient points and getting those in writing is a valuable activity. Okay, as you wrap up your thoughts there, and just really appreciate allowing the learning and teaching team to come in today and learn a little bit about our work and our opportunity to share. And unless there's anything else, I appreciate the time.
Bill, can I request that we get this portion at a board meeting?
Yeah, actually, that's what I was just talking with Jeremy about. We'll get the wrap up and we'll do two things. There's also a transitional bilingual instruction plan that would be great to do a workshop on in the fall and then get the board's approval on that plan moving forward into next year. So we will do both of those.
Can I add, just because this is where my passion is, growing up as an English language learner, and experiencing the public school system myself. Jeremy, you say that this is where the answers lie, which I get what you're saying. However, I think this is not giving us the answer. This has just identified a major component on how we're going to address the problem. And, how we come together is going to give us, the student results are going to give us the answers to that. So.
Hey, thank you, board. Thank you, Super Six.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any further questions or discussions? Great. This meeting's adjourned.